All right, the Stratford Zoning Commission is now open for public hearing for those petitions advertised to be heard in this session. We have no alternates tonight. We have a full complement of regular members. I wish to announce that should any items on tonight's agenda take more time than anticipated, the public hearing may conclude at 11 p.m. and be continued at another date, which will be established at that time. Any items not heard by 11 p.m. tonight will be heard at the continued public hearing. For the record, petitions to be heard this evening were advertised in the Connecticut Post on October 10th and October 17th. These properties were duly posted on 10/16/19. I don't think I have to announce that if anybody has any electronics, please mute them or turn them off. All right. All right, just the secretary has to do that tonight. Ms. Phillips, if you could read petition number 1, please.
Text amendment, a petition of the Stratford Zoning Commission seeking a text amendment to revive Article 12, I guess, regarding parking requirements for various uses.
Good evening. The proposed text amendment is something that the Zoning Commission has been working on, I would say, since the previous makeup of our Zoning Commission. And this was referred to several months ago, maybe a little bit longer, to the Planning Commission for an informal review and any informal recommendations prior to my staff putting together the formal application. Since then, we've had the new town planner who started, and the Planning Commission really took a good look at the entire parking, the parking requirements for all uses, and they've even come up with some additional uses that were not being accounted for, and all of those recommendations I fully support, and I'll quickly go through each of the amendments. Section 12.5.3 for home occupations, we are now requiring 2 spaces. We used to only require 1. This is to make sure that folks have an adequate parking when they have a home business, and that they are not going to be spilling out onto the street. The next one is 12.5.7, which is for restaurants. We used to require 1 space for every 60 square feet. We're increasing that to 75, and then 1 space for every 50 square feet of total floor space. And a lot of this was done based on some of the research that we had done, what other towns are doing, also reacting to the amount of variances that we tend to get for restaurants and takeouts, that we are asking for far too much parking. Based on reviewing what a lot of other towns similar in demographics and size to Stratford, we thought that we were asking a bit too much for our parking. So we think that this will, 1, make it a little bit easier for businesses to come into Stratford and open up, and 2, take some of the burden off of the Zoning Board of Appeals. The next section is 12.5.7.1, which... 12.5.7? Yes. You've decreased the amount of square footage of taverns closed? Let's see. So for restaurants, 1 space for every 75 square feet of total floor space, and for clubs, taverns, and it's 1 space for every 50. That's just what we saw was more consistent. That number was more consistent with what the industry standard was. So maybe we weren't quite asking enough for some of the cafe liquor permits or cafe tavern or bars. So it's just a turn of the dial up or down. I think that's the only one that's actually become a little bit more restrictive. For the drive-ins and restaurants, we increased that from 100 to 250 square feet. I think a good example of that was the Sonic, and also the Chipotle, Pizzico, all saying that they needed half the amount of spaces based on their research and what they experienced in other places in Connecticut.
On that same point, is that the shared space
Yes, shared parking still exists. If they have 200 spaces or more on site. The last square footage change was in 12.5.12, and that's for industrial and manufacturing establishments. We increased that from 400 to 500. That's a reaction to just the way that manufacturing has changed over the years. There are less people actually working in some of these manufacturing facilities. Many things are more automated, and also reacting to some of the variances we're seeing that we were taking in for some of these manufacturing uses. They're just not using the same amount of parking that they used to. And then, so we added 6 additional parking calculations for uses that we typically have not regulated before in the past. So health clubs, if someone wanted to open a health club, there was no parking requirement. They could just open up. Similar with automotive, school, elementary schools, high schools, convenience stores, and supermarkets. So we thought that this would give the town at least a bit more guidance as to what we should be asking for in terms of parking for some of these uses that are pretty common. Yes.
For the high schools, the one spot for every 2 seats, I'm not sure, because I don't know the answer to this, is whether or not our new high school would have even have met that requirement, because it doesn't seems a little stringent. And the same thing for elementary schools. I mean, these kids, elementary school doesn't drive, so why are we doing 1 space for every 3 seats? It seems a little restrictive.
I guess I would ask what we're basing that off of. So we took a comparison of all the towns of similar demographic, and we went off of those numbers. So in elementary school, middle school, junior high school, it's less restrictive. So it's 1 space for every 3. Let's see.
That's more restrictive.
No, it's actually the opposite. The high school is more restrictive.
Oh, yeah, it's more, but I meant we're making it more restrictive overall. We're putting stuff in that we didn't have before.
In the sense that we had no regulation about them altogether, it is becoming more restrictive. Prior, we weren't asking them to provide any parking.
So where this leads from is, I was involved, as some others here, in the new high school, and we struggled quite a bit. Most of our meetings were over gaining enough parking spaces. And we did a lot of work to squeeze out every bit that we could, but from my memory of how many spaces we had and how we did it, I don't think we came anywhere as close to the guideline that is here, and we're already setting in regulations that we're going to fail. It seems sort of makes sense, and that's number 1. Number 2, it is my hope at some point that the town will continue looking at updating our schools, possibly another new school, elementary or something, we don't know. But are we going to set ourselves up to be in more legal liability or variances or costs simply because we put in a self-defeating regulation?
Well, I would respond to that that's site-specific. I mean, we were trying to jam a contemporary high school onto 2 very small sites. And the overall building footprint was probably close to 80% of that site, not leaving a whole lot of room for flexibility for parking. So, it's hard to speculate what we're going to be doing with the schools. However, I think what most schools do is they provide parking to plan for the graduation, which is, in my opinion, not a good use of space. When those spaces could, those 20, 30, 40 spaces could be used for open space and fields and parks. I think it's a trade-off.
I don't know if that's necessarily accurate because depends on the weather. They often go off-site. Mostly what we spent a lot of time around was accommodating our teachers and staff, and then those for the high school who we thought how many would have cars. On the elementary and middle school, when I was involved with the Vicky Soto School, again, it was staff, but most of it was how many folks who are gonna be driving their car, you know, driving their kid, drop-off areas, the how much was out in the street, the line of how many cars can we get off of the street. I'm a little concerned about defining ourselves for just those two, elementary and high school. That's what I'm very, very specific on.
I'm sorry, you think we should be providing more parking or less parking?
I actually don't want to define it at all, because most of the time, because we're so short of space in town, we're just trying to fit in as much parking as we could get away with. I mean, it's not a matter of, like, when we did the high school, it wasn't, this is the ideal number and we're going to have that number. It was, how many spaces can we get out? What's the maximum we can draw out of this? It wasn't based on a regulation. It was based on availability of space that we could squeeze out. And elementary schools, if you look at Nichols, they have even less. So to put in something that automatically sets us up for some kind of litigation or some kind of complaint is my concern. And it's self-imposed. So I'm actually not thrilled about putting those two in right yet.
And my last response to that would be, while that would take care of some public schools, we've got a wide variety of schools that are here in Stratford. You've got charter schools, you've got private schools that would not get caught. And so what a lot of municipalities will do is exempt themselves from from the parking regulation for high schools. However, that can be a slippery slope there with, you know, kind of giving carte blanche to the town to do whatever it wants. So while no regulation perfectly does what we want it to do, I think that was the intent of this regulation. So if you feel otherwise, you know, we'd be happy to admit that.
So,
and I understand where you're coming from.
So this isn't really so much only public schools. This would apply to even our parochial schools, but you're saying even our smaller little daycare centers are in their own category, right?
Yes.
So charter schools. I just wish we could define it a little bit better, because I think, I mean, we already went to court at the high school level because the neighbor who had the car wash was trying to come up with an excuse around parking and interference with their business. I hate to see the town spend more money on litigation for something that we imposed on ourselves. I just don't have an answer.
Mr. Hendrick?
So I guess my first question is, how do you determine seats? It says 3 seats. Is it based on classroom size? Is it based on students? Is it a fluctuating number?
It's based on every seat that's in there. So we're talking about administration seats. We're talking about classroom seats.
But-
Every seat. So every person that's sitting down in a seat in that building.
But is that, so each year, well, school population fluctuates, administration and staff fluctuates from year to year. So if this year they cut a couple, you know, administrators or the nurse or, you know, an assistant, does that reduce the seats?
No, this is just for when someone is coming in to get something approved.
But you don't know the full staffing of this school. I mean, it's a vague number. You know, the 3 seats is a very vague number. I mean, how do you define seats? Is it by enrollment? Is it by desks? Is it by, I mean, then do you count toilet seats? I mean, you know, what defines seats? So it's
where someone is sitting down, not using the bathroom.
I'm just saying, yeah.
And then one year you have less students or less teachers, you're gonna have a little bit extra parking. Like I said, there's no perfect regulation that's gonna encapsulate everything. We do our best, and what we pull off of is just, you know, what are best practices that are being used,
So when I'm looking at this, it's kind of, so if you have 200 seats, I mean, if you had 20 kids per class, you know, even just the first through 5, so that's 5 classrooms. If you have 20 kids per class, 2 classrooms, it's 200 kids. You're requiring 70 spaces. And now if you include, you know, administrative offices and so forth, that number, you know, goes up even more. So I don't know if there's an elementary school that provides or needs 70 parking spaces, you know? I know my wife works at Johnson Academy, and I think they all park in the front, and I've never counted, I don't know if they park in the back, I don't know for sure, but 70 seems like a large number. But all the, like Ms. Phillips said, you know, what school meets that requirement? And then if we want to do renovations to a new school, then they have to comply with that. Then we have to look at taking property, you know, through eminent domain to create parking spaces that we may or may not need, which, you know, I understand the intent or the hope, but I don't know that that, like Ms. Phillips said, I don't know that I think that that's all the other ones I can understand and I could see an argument, and they're all quantifiable. You know, it's 70 square feet. That's easy. Well, you're going and you measure the thing. But 3 seats, how do you count the seats? Is it students? Is it desks? Is it, you know, what is it? So, anyway, I think that's a little, I think it leaves too much room for question and for confusion. And so until that gets clarified, I mean, the other stuff I'm in favor of, but it's too vague. 3 seats is just too random of a number, and it's kind of like spinning a board and throwing a dart and hope you hit it, and you don't know. And none of our schools meet it, so how do we comply with it from the start? We're all out of compliance, and so, anyway.
And just to clarify, we didn't pull 3 out of a hat. It's not a random number. It's a number that we've basically looked at similar municipalities to us. You know, and that's typically what most schools are requiring in an automobile age. And that's why we chose it. So if the commission does not feel comfortable with that, we could certainly omit that and maybe ask the planning commission to do a little bit further research as to why we came up with that number, and maybe refine it so that if there's an appetite to maybe to look at it again, we can certainly bring it back. I think it's always better. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I wouldn't be opposed to the language that said any future schools, not any future renovations, but, you know, all existing schools are grandfathered, any future schools or any new development of a school needs to meet these requirements.
That's how it would work. No existing school would have to re-comply with this.
Even if they were to do
A renovation.
even if they were to do a renovation and then they had to comply
If you
with,
were to knock down the entire school like we did here,
like we did.
then the new regulations would apply.
Yeah, which would mean Stratford High couldn't exist.
And
Or we would have to waive our own rules. But if we did, say like we did up at Flood or some of the other schools where we've done some major renovations, do they need to now fall into these, you know, into these zoning regulations, this parking regulation? So we're taking schools that don't meet the regulation, creating a regulation which might hinder our ability to make improvements to our schools. And that, I don't think that's what anybody is intending here, so.
So would there be more of an appetite to propose a regulation that would exempt the town from complying with, so that we don't miss a new charter school that opens up?
I liked your first idea of sending it back to the planning. The way I think to approach this is to look at it not based on seats, but based on staff levels, all right? A different measurement. I understand that you didn't come up with the number out of the thin air, and I understand it came from other municipalities who are probably no more in compliant than, you know, we're saying. But if we want to have something that actually is usable, then I think the way we approach it might need to be different, that's all. Is the likelihood of a charter school coming to Stratford? I don't know, but there is probably a likelihood that we'll have to renovate another school. That's just normal. And what school that would be, I don't know, but we have some old schools. And I want to give us enough latitude that we don't tie ourselves in a tizzy, in a legal bind of our own making. So if there's no penalty in not including those 2 statutes and eliminating those and looking at them later, I would suggest not putting ourselves through a whole lot of tension.
Here's what Stratford High School did, and I'm not looking to beat a dead horse here. What the town did, since there was no regulation, they went to the next closest thing, which was an assembly hall. And the assembly hall required them to they still had to go for the parking variance, because that was the closest thing that we could apply it to. So we wanted to at least put something that was under that larger requirement, that was the closest relatable use. A still had to come through with a parking requirement, but it didn't match probably what we think it should have been, which was far less, although the new high school still wouldn't have met that this parking regulation. But like I said, that's a problem with the site, not necessarily the regulation. But, so that,
Is it any action required tonight?
no action is required.
Okay, why don't we just,
Can we vote on the project excluding these two items and refer those back to planning?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm happy with everything else. It was just those two kind of stood out. And the other thing that I saw, only because I know this is minor, just as a question. Back in the offices in RS district for permitted home occupation, a minimum of 2 spaces, which I think is great. But part of our traffic regulations don't allow a home office to put a sign on the street saying that these 2 spots were reserved for an office. So it sort of countermands this minimum requirement. Can we say something that it's exempt from signage, or some kind of site, I don't know what they call it. It's traffic. We have some law on the books that says for street parking, you cannot designate parking spaces for a business, all right, to be used. But yet here, we're saying that you need to have a minimum of 2 spaces. So how do you do that?
Because we can regulate private property. We cannot regulate public property, the public realm. So this is saying a home occupation requires 2 parking spaces off-street.
Off-street.
These are all off, none of these have to do with on-street parking.
Oh, this doesn't say, I don't see the word off-street.
It's all because we don't regulate it. It's implied that these are all off-street. Nothing, we don't allow for any on-street parking.
Okay.
Any zoning. That's a traffic authority, like you mentioned, the police department. Those are the ones who can either reserve a spot for someone who has a special need or something else to that effect. So, and just to be clear, so I would be happy to remove section 12.5.18 regarding elementary schools, middle schools, junior high schools, and then 12.5.19 for high schools.
And send it back to planning for further.
Yes.
Is that something we would vote on now, or?
No, we could close this item and move on to the next one, and then we can vote on it with with the stipulations to omit those 2 sections for further study.
okay, so you're done explaining the rest of this one?
Unless anyone has any more questions.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Solhaven?
just real quickly on 12.5.20, just because recently we've gone down this road a few times with convenience markets. I'm assuming the definition's spelled out. There's probably a number of locations, once again, that would not fit this definition. Just so I'm clear on the process, so if it's a new construction, does it fall into this, or anything that's grandfathered, say, and I'm thinking like you know which one I'm talking about, Bruce Avenue and Barnum. If somebody had wanted to go in there again and came to us for grocery, beer permit, something like that, would it trigger any of these regulations? Because I know that's probably going to be a problem area at some point.
And that depends on use. So if you had a convenience store that went out of business 10 years ago and there's been no break in that use.
Okay.
New convenience store comes in, they take advantage of that pre-existing right, that pre-existing approval, they're allowed to just go in. Someone wants to, convenience store, it could really be anything. The building gets, there's a fire and they knock it down. They have to comply with the new regulations.
Okay, because I'm also thinking of there's another location I'm thinking of in town that was a convenience store for a number of years. It's now a barber shop, but if they ever wanted to go back to a convenience store, I was just wondering, would that then approve?
Yep.
Yeah.
Then they would have to comply with the new regulation.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right. Anybody else have anything on this text amendment? Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, motion to,
Yeah, that's right.
okay.
Forward, yes.
Anybody here would like to speak in favor of this text amendment? Anybody here would like to speak in favor? Mr. Knott?
My name is Barry Knott, 1656 Main Street, Stratford. Two comments, one of which has to do with the restaurant parking regulation. It's needed to be changed for a long time. The problem is not the 1 per 60 square feet. The problem is that the regulation requires you to count as the square footage all of the space inside the building, including the back of the house, including the restrooms, including the kitchen, including the outdoor dining area. So if you've got a 3,000 square foot restaurant and you've got 1,500 square foot of kitchen, and you've got a 350 square foot outdoor seating area in the street in front of you, you've got to count the seating in the street, you got to count the interior restaurant seating area, and you got to count the kitchen under that 1 per 60. So I say leave it at 1 per 60 if you want, or make the changes you want, but eliminate the back of the house. So there's only service area, it's only customer area that's counted in the square footage calculation. That would make a huge, huge difference, because the parking regulations for restaurants in this town are ridiculous. You got to have so many parking spaces. 1 per 60, a doctor is 1 per 65. Doctors got patients coming out of their ears all day long, and they're at 1 per 165. Fortunately, we lawyers don't have a parking problem. As far as whether the town can exempt itself from its own regulations, the state statute says that a municipality can't exempt itself from its own regulations. However, it has to be done by the town council in the case of Stratford. And when they exempt themselves from the regulations, they have to exempt themselves from all of the regulations. They can't pick and choose, all right, I'm going to exempt myself from this one, I'm going to exempt myself from that one. They got to exempt themselves from all of the zoning regulations. So theoretically, we could have a horse rendering plant at Booth Park. So for that reason, most municipalities have not exempted themselves from the zoning regulations. And I defer to council as to whether I'm correct or not, but I had an opportunity to research this recently, and I think I am. Thank you.
And I would respond to that with, we should be counting kitchen space, because there are people who drive to work and get to work who are in those kitchens. And the people who are sitting in the outdoor dining areas, they got there somehow, possibly by car. I would say that storage areas probably should not be included into that calculation. But I'm not sure I agree with the argument that your kitchens, your outdoor dining areas should not be taken into the parking calculation.
Anyone else who'd like to speak in favor? I'm not quite sure if that was in favor or not, but.
Yeah, but I do want to ask a question, though, to our administrator. If I understand that outdoor seating is included in the count, and I agree that it should be seated, but I don't see the rationale for including storage area, and I do understand why counting all of the kitchen is a burden. Most kitchens don't have a lot of employees in there unless they're a big restaurant. Then they have a really big kitchen. Is there some other formula that we could come up with? My point of it is not to burden our restaurants unfairly with having spaces put aside for unused spaces, which only force them to come back to us with a variance.
Point of clarification, Mr. Chairman. I misspoke a moment ago when I said that the outdoor patios have to count towards parking. That is true unless there are less than 16 seats. Less than 16 seats. So if you got 15 seats in the outdoor patio, you don't have to count it. You got 16 seats or more, you do have to count it.
Thank you.
I think it's the
You're gonna have to repeat the question. I'm sorry.
So the question is there a way to carve out storage from being counted? And number two, I do understand the argument that a kitchen does not have as many people in it as it would be a seating customer. So is there a formula that we can apply that does not require all of the kitchen to be included for parking?
Yeah, I don't know. You know, we base these numbers off of just best planning practices. So those are the numbers that we're going off of. You could always just increase that square footage number, and you would essentially be achieving the same thing. You'd just be making the parking less restrictive. You could exempt storage area, although I think you would have restaurateurs figuring out ways to work around that. By designating their entire basement, which sometimes hosts parties, as storage space, which we've had. And we hear every iteration of these when people come in trying to massage the parking regulations so that they don't need to go for a variance. So there probably is a way, although I'm sure the market would find a crafty way around it, but we could certainly take another look at that and see if there's a way to sharpen our pencil on that regulation.
May I make another comment, Mr. Chairman? There's a simple way to do it without getting involved in excluding this and excluding that. Take the 1 per 60 and make it 1 per 100 instead of 1 per 70. And at 1 per 100, you're essentially excluding part of the kitchen and the storage areas. And that way you can leave the regulation exactly the way it is right now and just change the number from 60 to 100 and you've accomplished the same thing.
Okay, moving right along. Yeah, we're gonna be here all night beating this one to death. Does anybody like to speak in opposition? Anyone in opposition? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion to close. By Ms. Phillips, second by Mr. Vacola. All those in favor say aye. Opposed? So moved. Mr. Solhavy, if you could move us into text amendment number 2, please.
Item number 2, text amendment petition of Stratford Planning Commission seeking a text amendment to revise section 16.2 to allow for electronic message signs on town-owned property.
Okay, thank you. So the Planning Commission, I would say for the past maybe 4 to 6 months has been working on this regulation in an effort to try to clean up some of our areas where we allow for temporary sandwich signs or lawn signs at no charge for as long as the advertiser is Stratford-based nonprofit and it's for a Stratford-based event. So you have your St. James Pancake Breakfast, Little League sign up for Stratford. They get to put them at the green at East Broad Street and Main Street and then at Paradise Green. So the Planning Commission, through the efforts of some of the several of the commissioners who had kind of taken a lead on this, had gone and visited other municipalities that had implemented such digital signage, and in an effort to clean up blight, to portray a sense of modernity, and while also through design keeping within the historical integrity of the town of Stratford. Proposing some of these ground-based monument signs at these 2 locations, or it's really town-owned property. So the only thing that we're looking at here is the one sentence that says 16.2.9 electronic message signs. Everything underneath that, after the picture, is guidance for an ordinance that the town council would ultimately adopt, which are really the details of how bright it can be, when it could be on, let's see, the intervals of change, as well as, let's see, where it can face. So what the Zoning Commission is being asked to do tonight is to consider the adoption of the allowance of these electronic message signs with the language that's been provided.
So 16.2.9 is in itself is kind of far-reaching. I think it's brought under control to some extent by the verbiage beyond the picture. So I'd hate to see us approve something and then they go to the council and then they throw away. I hate those electronic billboards. They're bright, they're obnoxious. And if it was something, and not that it's gonna be a billboard like that, but if it didn't have some restrictions on the lighting and the intensity of the lighting, I wouldn't be in favor of it, and I wouldn't be in favor of sending it to somebody who could then alter it. So from my perspective, I would like to see the whole thing sent to the council as 16.2.9 would include the language beyond the sign as well, the picture.
And a part of the problem with that, because we had a couple different versions of this that was much more extensive, you know, 3-4 pages. However, someone has to enforce that. And how we would have a zoning enforcement officer go out in the evenings with a lumens detector, you know, there are resources that are required in order to be able to do that. I'm not sure if it was my suggestion or a suggestion of the planning commission that they felt that the details of exactly how the sign would be ordered and come preset would be in that ordinance. But I understand what you're saying, that you'd feel more comfortable with all of these being in the zoning regulations. My concern was that is, well, now I'm gonna be tasked to somehow enforce some of these intervals, whereas I would prefer, and typically what zoning would really be looking at more so is that the language that's being proposed falls within the regulation, that it's a Stratford-based nonprofit, and that it's for, or if the town decided, hey, get out and vote, there's a storm coming, that the town would be able to implement it like that as well. So
But
we went back and forth on what you're suggesting.
But these are all town-owned signs on town property, and the information put on those would be done by a town employee.
Moderated by the town, correct.
So if the town ordered the sign within that criteria, you know, partly the intervals, maybe yes or no, but the brightness, which is mainly my concern, is the brightness can be regulated by whether it's purchasing or when you put a purchase order together, you have certain requirements that go into it. And when a sign gets purchased, it's not like these things are gonna be popping up all over the place. I'm assuming they'll be in a couple locations, and the look of them would need to be regulated to some extent. You know, whether it's through ordinance or what, because you want it to look nice. I mean, this one they've got, I think, which is in Old Saybrook, which I've seen a couple now, and they're nice. And they're not overly bright. But, so if we had something in there, the town controls it, so, you know, it's not like you have to check it every day, because that's the way it was ordered.
And I think that's what the thought, maybe I'm misunderstanding you, but I think that's what the thought process was for it to be an ordinance so that's the only way that it comes. It comes this one way, and then the zoning office is tasked with making sure that whatever gets submitted, not the technical specs of the sign itself, but the actual what's being projected on it is what we would regulate. But
I mean, I wouldn't want to, my whole thing is I wouldn't want a sign that's overly bright. And I think
Agreed.
if we send this to council and they decide, no, we want something overly bright, then like the antennas that went up there and went awry, you know, I want to start now by not saying, you know, you have permission to do this without some regulation in front. So the only way I'll approve this is that if it includes language about the brightness.
well, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
The other side of this is, and you've been on council, council's going to have a number of opinions of their own, and they're going to want to be able to have some input. You know, you might think it's not bright, somebody else might want it even less. So I think for this to actually pass, it needs to have enough broadness to allow council to put an ordinance. It's also, when it's an ordinance, the police enforce it and the town enforces it, and town council members will have a responsibility to it. It has a broader impact. When it's in a regulation under land use, then it falls on the planning and zoning administrator and to administer it, and it doesn't quite have the impact as what the council and the mayor and so forth. So I understand the planning's idea of, we'll put the broad pieces in places. We still don't even know that the town council will even agree with it or move forward with it. All this ordinance is saying is that we are allowing an electronic sign with some guidance as to how we think it should happen. Town council may come back and say, no, we don't like electronic signs. We're not going to do it.
Okay, any other further, Mr. Solhaby?
Actually,
No?
this is a tough one because I know Commissioner Staley has spoken to me often about this. It's something near and dear to his heart. And I don't know how I feel about it, to be honest with you, because I see problems in this in a couple different areas. I'm not a fan of the sandwich board signs or A-frame signs that we have on Paradise Green. It gets way out of control. There's too much stuff in there. People generally don't take them down too frequently. It's not all nonprofits. It's just very unsightly. I don't know if this is the solution, though. And one thing I am concerned about, and obviously if this is something the town council is going to have to get into forming a regulation, is that if you put up a sign that says, come to the such and such dinner on there, that's your sign. It's on town property, but it's your sign. You have control over it. At this point, the town's now becoming a bit of an actor in this, is that you are advertising on a town asset, a town-owned piece of equipment. And I don't know what the ramifications for that are in different areas. I mean, Stratford-based nonprofit, okay? I could see there being some issues with even that definition, which seems rather benign. And if some organization, for some reason or another, somebody takes objection to it, are we going to be in the business of deciding whether or not that should be in there? I'll give an example. Boy Scouts of America decides that they're going to have a whatever, a pasta night. Somebody might complain and say, we don't like the positions by the Boy Scouts of America in different social issues. The town should not be advertising this on a public billboard. What do we do now? I'm just worried about where we go with this if the town becomes an arbiter of what is posted on a taxpayer-funded sign by possession of it, by the electric bill associated with it. I would defer to our attorneys to say that, and maybe this is something for the town council phase of this, and I don't know how old Saybrook did it, but I'm just starting to see some yellow flags here, and I want to make sure that they are addressed at some point before we go down that road. Thank you.
And I would just add, I have those similar concerns because it's no different than we have. I mean, we're approving these sandwich signs today and making those judgment calls on free speech. We like this, we don't like this. I think there's concern about having these signs being posted altogether. However, I still think that, I do feel like this would clean up those areas. I think it would achieve that if we're able to get the right product out. But I'm not sure from a legal perspective whether it's any different than it is today, because we're reviewing the signs that are going up right now, which is a concern of mine already.
And that's where I was going to go. I mean, really and realistic, how much are you monitoring and controlling the signs at Paradise Green and Broadbridge and all these other little corners that things are going up? I've seen stuff go up that I'm sure you're not catching. Somebody comes by, sticks a lawn sign in it, and off they go. And we can't do anything about it. And then we still are liable of, why is that person allowed to put a sign on a town property? I think the bigger issue here is we're looking at trying to clean up blight. We're trying to make our town more beautiful. And these lawn signs and some of these A-frame signs don't add to the character. And at times can be even a safety issue because they block visibility. It also doesn't give the town the opportunity to get information out, especially in an emergency. We don't have the vehicles that we used to have to be able to do it. And this is technology that gives the town an opportunity to showcase some of the events that we're doing in a clean and orderly manner without incurring a lot of expense. So I look at the bigger picture of trying to clean up the town and letting the town, and having some faith that the town council may have that same goal and coming together, all 10 of them, with something that the town would appreciate. And I think we need to have some trust in that and not feel that we have to control and micromanage every piece of it.
I definitely have some input here that, seeing everyone's brought up the subject of signs that don't belong where they are and them being blight. As you all know, my daytime job is the blight officer. I remove on an average of 130 to 150 a month of signs that do not belong in the right-of-ways, blocking the sightline vision of traffic, as Ms. Phillips stated. I'm still not sure that this is going to solve the problem unless we can definitely ban all those signs on top of it all. I mean, we have ordinances, we have regulations that prevent people from doing it, and they still do it. Is this going to help? I'm not sold on it yet. I mean, I'd be in favor of, a test one, maybe on the West Broad Street Green, But there is definitely a need for something to get rid of all these signs around town. It totally disgusting the way the town looks sometimes when they are out there, and something I would like to visit next month or the month after, but not tonight. Any other for Mr. Henrik?
Yeah, just, the planning commission has taken the time, whether we approve or deny this, but planning commission has taken the time to incorporate some language in here that I think and they believe is very pertinent and very critical to the implementation of this. So I think if we do approve it, or if we do send it to council with a favorable recommendation, that we do include in all the language, not just the front of the page, but all the way to the bottom of item 5. And if we want to make some adjustments to it here, we can, but I think if we do send it over, whatever the recommendation, it should be in full and not in parts, because I think some of it actually, I agree that those sandwich boards back in the day, they were the thing, but I think they've gotten out of control. I don't like the fact that it changes it stays for every 5 minutes, but there's no single solution. The nice part about the sandwich boards is that when you drive by,
It's there.
you can see the one you want, but
Right.
you don't always see these. But I think it will clean up the town. I think they can be built in an aesthetically pleasing manner that's actually complements whether it's West Broad or Paradise Green, and can enhance our environment. But I think we definitely should send the whole package over.
Right, okay. Any further comments?
We can send the whole package over and ask them to include this in the ordinance. And they may appreciate, I think they will, if the town council has some really strong feelings about some of the, guidelines or whatever we put in it, they can come back. It's a start. I mean, they put a lot of work into this, and this is a big step forward for this town. And I don't want to see us take hard work like this and not move forward on it or let it linger till it disappears. We've got a problem, and I think it's something that we can address and involve the town in. And I'd like to see us at least take some action, one way or the other, even if it's a compromise.
Anybody else, anybody who'd like to speak in favor of this petition? Anyone in favor?
Barry Knott, 1656 Main Street, Stratford. I'm neither in favor nor opposed. However, I am not a constitutional lawyer as Senator Kelly is. But a regulation that authorizes the municipality to have the privilege of an electronic sign, which does not extend the same privilege to a private person, may violate the Equal Protection Clause of the United States Constitution. And signs are the kinds of cases where people go to court to litigate. I want a sign. You remember the corner of Nichols Avenue and North Avenue, the guy with the flags? You remember that? He went to court over that. Mm-hmm. But all I'm saying is, you've got brilliant lawyers over here that know this stuff. But I would check on the constitutionality of it, because you're allowing one set of people to have this privilege but not another. That violates the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution.
Thank you.
Which may be saved by the police power.
Good evening. I'm Pat Patuski, 41 Yarwood Street, and I am the chair of the Planning Commission. And I would just like to comment on a few things that were discussed, because we spent, Gail could attest to this, probably 4 or 5 months working on this language. And I agree with Commissioner Henrik. The whole thing should go to the council, not just that one section, because a lot of what's in here is there for a reason. It wasn't just to put electronic signs on any town property. It was specific to the gateways into the town of Stratford, West Broad Street and Paradise Green. It was not written to go anywhere else. It could be expanded. That's up to the council or what you want to do. But from the planning perspective, we just wanted to, as I think Mr. Fredette said, try it at a couple locations. We were concerned about the lighting, whether it even says it should not face a residential property. So where we would put it would be determined that it would make sure it didn't face a residential property, that it wasn't too bright. There is no perfect solution to anything. There will always be issues. To Mr. Knott's question, we already require that the A-frames be nonprofit, Stratford nonprofits. No business can put a sign on West Broad or Paradise Green. So we're already doing that, to his point. And Mr. Hibansky has mentioned, and this was our overriding reason for doing it, was to beautify the town, to make it a nicer place. It also was to get information out, because we don't have a Stratford newspaper. We don't have a community calendar. So this was a way to get the word out. And since Mr. O'Brien came in, I should give recognition to, when I was working for the town, Mr. O'Brien would talk in my ear about how West Broad, Paradise Green was ugly. The signs were there forever. They weren't taken down. They were for businesses sometimes, and then they would get taken down. It just was, to us, an eyesore. It also meant that our park staff, when they went to cut the grass, had to take all the signs down. Then they had to put them back up. So it also costs the town more money when we do that with the A-frames. This was a way to, I guess, bring the town into the 21st century, get the information out to the public that they want to know in a more aesthetically pleasing manner, and in only 2 locations. And we're not changing any of the rules that the town already has for those 2 locations, that they're only Stratford nonprofits. As I said, and it also says that there cannot be any other A-frame signs at West Broad or Paradise Green, so that we don't have, we put this electronic sign up and then it doesn't do any good. As far as Mr. Fredette, you're correct about all those other signs all over the place. I wish we could do something about that, but for now, this is where we're starting. This is just to start, to find a solution, and to beautify the town. And certainly, from the Planning Commission, if I can answer any questions, I certainly will. It took several months, people traveling all over the state of Connecticut looking into it. And the Planning Commission passed this unanimously because we felt that it was an overriding positive for the town, as opposed, overriding some of the negatives that might happen. So, thank you very much.
Thank you. Anybody else who'd like to speak in favor of this petition or text amendment? Mr. O'Brien, would you like to share your knowledge of illegal signs around town with us? And
Well, I'm sure you all know I'm Bill O'Brien, 450 Chickadee Lane, and opponent of these signs for many, many years. In fact, I tell the story about the time News 12 interviewed me at Paradise Green when they had, what they call it, a program like What's Your Gripe? And of course, our blight officer, who happens to be sitting here tonight, does a great job of removing illegal signs and
thank you.
gladly takes my calls, report them. And I always tell anybody willing to listen that doesn't like these, take a ride down Boston Avenue through into Bridgeport or down Route 1 in Devon, and it's just litter. And when I see signs here that are a week old, that's all it is litter. So I think it's a great idea what planning commissions have planned. I've seen it up in Bristol, and it looks good. And I think at some point we should have fines. Once those go up, eliminate any signs except, I think we've agreed nonprofits and local organizations can put them out for a time as long as they're removed on a timely basis, and have fines in the future. Let's put an end to it. And keep up the great work you're doing, Mr. Blight Officer.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to speak in favor?
One moment. In view of the comment that Mr. O'Brien just made, I retract my observation earlier about the unconstitutionality of this regulation.
Okay, thank you. Anyone, where the hell are we? Oh, anybody in anyone in opposition? Anyone in opposition? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to close by Mr. Vacola, second by Mr. Henrik. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? So moved. Text amendment number 3, I believe, has been withdrawn. Correct, Mr. Knott? You're going to...
Correct.
But I understand you are going to speak on number 4 for us.
Yes, I am.
Okay. Mr. Vacola, can you read number 4?
Yes, sir. 325 James Farm Road, petition of William Fedorko and the estate of David Fedorko, seeking a site plan review and zone change from an RS1 to an RS2 zone.
Kind of light tonight. Is that the same one from last night?
Good evening, ladies, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. My name is Barry Knott. I'm a lawyer with the firm of Knott & Dunn with offices at 1656 Main Street, Stratford. I'm here this evening on behalf of William Fedorko and the estate of David Fedorko, owners of the property at 325 James Farm Road. At this time, I'd like to submit the certificates of mailing and make reference to a folder of exhibits which I have handed to you and to which I'll be making reference during the course of my presentation, which will be brief. This is an application for site plan review and change of zone from RS1, single-family residential 1-acre zone, to RS2, half-acre single-family residential zone, for a 4.4835, 195,300 square foot piece of property located on the left side of James Farm Road, immediately after you cross the bridge over the Merritt Parkway. That's where this property is located. Exhibit 1 is a copy of your zoning regulation, section 4.2, in which the dimensional requirements of the various zones are set forth. I have highlighted in yellow the dimensions as they relate to the RS2 zone. As you can see from this exhibit, a lot area of 20,000 square feet is required in an RS2 zone with a 100-foot lot width and 125-foot lot depth. And I want to make reference to Jay's administrative comments dated October 15, 2019. In his memorandum, Jay points out that a majority of the property to the north, east, and south of the Fedorko property is zoned RS1. This is true, and it would include most of the land south of the Merritt Parkway, on the east side of James Farm Road, as you're heading north, and to the north along both sides of James Farm Road. All of those properties are zoned RS1. Jay also points out that the future land use plan for this area, as set forth in Figure 7 on page 21 of the Plan of Conservation and Development, identifies this parcel as residential open space, which is characterized by larger residential lots and residential developments with ample open space and a density of approximately 1 dwelling unit per acre. Now, Exhibit 2 is a copy of Figure 7 on page 21 of the Plan of Conservation and Development, to which Jay makes reference. And if you can see that little pink area right above the Merritt Parkway, which I've circled in blue pen, that is the area of the Fedorko property. And you will note from this exhibit that the Fedorko property is located in the middle of an area as shown by the color designation white. There's a whole area around Fedorko's property is white as opposed to the other colors that are on this map. If you look at the right of the map, you will see the various color designations set forth in a chart. Unfortunately, my printer cut off the right side of this page. However, I can tell you that the white designation shown second from the top in that color designation references residential open space. That's what that says. The white is residential open space, which is consistent with Jay's comments. However, in looking at this map, one could conclude that all of the property located in this residential open space area is zoned RS1, single family, 1 acre residential. This white area does not distinguish between RS1 and RS2 zones. So if you look at this map, say, all right, everything in the white area is zoned RS1. That's what I thought when I looked at it, okay? If you look at Exhibit 3, which is a little bit of a handful. If you open it up, the Fedorko property is outlined in pink, okay? 4-point-something acres. And this is a combination of two assessors' maps of this area where the Fedorko property is located. On this exhibit, I've colored the Fedorko property in pink and I've encircled in yellow the property in this area which is already zoned RS2. As you can see from this exhibit, the RS2 zone property abuts the Fedorko property to the north and the west, including the applicant's other property at 335 James Farm Road. There's a little house at 335 James Farm Road that's immediately adjacent to this property that's owned by my clients as well. And includes all of the homes on both sides of Harvest Ridge Road, Arrowwood Place, Pepperidge Circle, Cut Spring Road, Nutmeg Lane, Crested Ridge, and Somerset Place. All of those streets that are within this yellow encircled area are zoned RS2. This RS2 zone encompasses all of the property abutting and adjacent to the Fedorko property with the exception of the long, fairly rectangular piece to the west of the Fedorko property, which is owned by the Connecticut Light and Power Company. Now, what they're doing with this piece, I have no idea. I have a feeling they don't even know that they own it. but it's zoned RS1. I didn't include this piece in my application for a zone change because I didn't have permission from the Connecticut Light and Power to do so. However, when you look at the map, it makes sense that this piece should be zoned RS2 as well as the rest, but I'll leave that for another day. Now, Exhibit 4 is a copy of the same map shown on Figure 7 and page 21 in the comprehensive plan of development. In this exhibit, I have highlighted the Fedorko piece in pink right above the MER in Merritt Parkway. The yellow to the left of that pink is the Connecticut Light and Power piece. And then you will see that there is an area in which I have outlined in red ink. That is the area that's outlined in yellow on the previous exhibit, the big map. So that area that's outlined in red on Exhibit 4 is the same area that's outlined in yellow on Exhibit 3. That is to say, that property is all zoned RS2. So the way the property located on the left side of James Farm Road immediately after you cross the Merritt Parkway would be, if this application were approved, the left side of James Farm Road as you cross the Merritt Parkway would be zoned RS2, while the property on the right side of James Farm Road, immediately after you cross the Merritt Parkway Bridge, would remain in the RS1 zone. The RS2 zone already exists in this neighborhood and abuts the Fedorko property. It would be a logical extension of that zone to include the Fedorko property within the RS2 zoning district. Last night, I appeared before the Planning Commission for a hearing on this proposed zone change for this property on a referral to them from this commission. I essentially made the same presentation to them last night as I'm making to you tonight. Obviously, their recommendation is not binding upon you. However, I can tell you that the Planning Commission did recommend approval of this zone change. Finally, 2 weeks ago, I sent out the letters to abutters, as I am required to do. As soon as those letters hit the mailboxes of the neighbors, war drums and smoke signals could be heard and seen from the teepees along James Farm Road. Neighbor called neighbor, wanting to know what Attorney Knott was up to regarding his Fedorko property. Obviously, this reaction was the consequence of these James Farm Road neighbors having had to endure, over the past few years, numerous applications for affordable housing projects in the area of their homes. These applications have been very time-consuming, very stressful to the neighbors, and expensive to oppose with expert testimony and attorney's fees. The neighbors' concern was that by virtue of my requesting the zone change from RS1 to RS2, that the Fedorkos were going to make it easier for a developer to come in, purchase the property, and somehow use the zone change from RS1 to RS2 to support an affordable housing application. Now, I won't go into the reasons why that argument makes no sense. Essentially, it doesn't make any difference what the zoning of the property is, because the affordable housing application trumps the underlying zoning, but that's beside the point. When I heard about the neighbor's concern, I contacted Mr. Fedorko and explained the issue to him. I also explained to him that the solution to resolving the neighbor's concern was to record a restrictive covenant on the land records, limiting the future use of his property to single-family residential only. Once this restriction is recorded, no use other than single-family residential can ever occur on this property in perpetuity. Mr. Fedorko agreed to this suggestion, and I hereby stipulate that the Fedorko property will be subject to such a restriction in the event that the requested zone change is granted. This will essentially take one more fairly large parcel of property in the James Farm Road area off the list of available properties attractive to affordable housing developers. Now, I would request your support for this application should this zone change be approved. We're going to go back to the Planning Commission with a subdivision. This happens to be a very attractive piece to subdivide because the road's already in. no roads, Mike. I mean, this is beautiful, okay? So it's probably gonna result in 6 or 7 lots instead of 3 or 4, because if it's more than 5, we've got to give 10% open space under the subdivision regulations. So we're probably talking about picking up 3, maybe 4 more lots if it's zoned RS2. But they're gonna be half-acre lots. They're gonna be the same kind of houses that are on Harvest Ridge and all of the houses that Chris Vargas built up in that area. It's gonna be very attractive, and it doesn't violate the plan of conservation and development, and I would request your support. Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Knott? Mr. Salebi.
Okay, just, so the property itself, I just want procedurally, this does have to go back to planning for the subdivision. It's not a first cut where they aren't eligible to do it by
No,
right?
because we're gonna be doing 6 lots, probably, 6 or 7 lots. So a 6 or 7 lot cut requires subdivision approval.
And just for the record, the residents of my district up there have had to endure an awful lot over the last few years, so, you know,
Did you get any calls?
I did not.
I'm surprised.
But TP dweller, I'm not gonna, I'll let that go. But anyway. So this does not include the CLNP property.
I mean, you guys on your own motion can submit an application to change the zone of the CLNP property. You don't need their permission to do it. I wasn't gonna take on CLNP because it's not my battle. But it makes sense that it should be the same zone as all the surrounding properties. So,
Does the state have any right-of-way, considering that abuts the Merritt Parkway?
not on our property. This
Okay.
property, by the way, was deeded, given to the Fedorcos by the Booth brothers. They had parcels all over town, which I just found out about, that people who worked for them or were nice to them when they were building that thing up at Booth Park, they gave them property all over town, the Booth brothers did. And this was one of them.
Very
Yeah.
nice.
Wish I knew them.
Yeah, me too.
I'd be dead now, but other than that.
Oh. And this restrictive deed, has a copy of that been provided to us?
No, it has not.
Why not?
Well, yeah.
I'm curious, I mean, I'm taking on faith.
Well, no, I mean, the attorneys can review the validity of the restrictive covenant. Now, let me make an observation, and they'll probably tell you this if I don't. You can't change the zone subject to a condition. You either change the zone or you don't. So you can't make it a stipulation in your zone change approval that we provide you with a restrictive covenant. I believe we can. They can't do that. Huh? So, yeah, so you gotta take my word for it that Fedorco has agreed to do this. It can't be incorporated, I mean, you could incorporate it into your approval if you want, I don't care, but I don't think it would be binding. You either gotta grant the zone change or not.
Okay, but it does help allay my concerns. That's why I'm asking about it. Okay, thank you.
Any other, Mr. Henrik?
See, I think you had said they also own, you said they own another parcel, is it the
Yeah,
abutting?
if you look, let me show
Is
you.
it 335?
Yes.
Okay.
And it's an odd-shaped piece.
Yep.
There's a sharp point of which that runs in front of this property.
Yeah, I see it.
And that piece of property, by the way, is already zoned RS2,
Okay,
335.
yep. And now, you had also said there's no roads,
So
so,
we could, what we're gonna do is we're gonna do a lot line adjustment between 335 and 325.
Yep.
We're gonna end up with like a 7 or 8 acre parcel. And I sat down and worked out a quick subdivision map on my, not to scale, obviously. And I got like 7 lots. And then you got the open space. And the lots are each gonna be 100 feet wide.
Yep.
There's more than adequate depth to make up the 20,000 square foot lot area requirement and depth requirement. And because James Farm Road and Harvest Ridge already exist, we don't have to put any roads in order to develop these lots. And there are sewers there.
yeah. So the intent is to have all the homes facing on either Harvest or
Correct.
James Farm?
The backup again is,
And so there won't be a road
no road,
that you're aware of?
no.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Any other conversation, shall we? No? Okay. Anybody who would like to speak in favor of this petition? Anybody in favor? Anybody in opposition? Anybody in opposition? Nothing, Tom? Okay. Don't be threatening.
The day he was born, I held him in my arms the day he came home from the hospital, and he had a big load in his hand.
Oh, jeez. Okay, that's more than we needed to know. Yeah, now the whole town will know. All right, seeing none, motion to close by Mr. Vacola, second by Ms. Phillips. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Did you want to speak? Too late now, sorry. All those in favor say aye. Opposed, so moved. Need a motion to close the public hearing portion of our meeting.
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Hendrick, second by Mr. Solhavy. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, so moved. Moving on to the administrative part of the meeting. We don't need a break, do we? No. I didn't think so. Anybody want to do anything with text amendment number 1? Mr. Hendrick.
Chair, motion to take text amendment regarding parking requirements off the table?
Motion by Mr. Hendrick to take off the table, second by Mr. Vacola. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So moved. Mr. Hendrick.
Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to approve with the amendments to remove 12.5.18 and 12.5.19.
Okay, was there another question on?
There was the restaurant, I mean, whether it was storage, but I think Mr. Urbaniski had talked about the difficulty of exempting storage, so.
Did you want that?
And the number was actually 75.
It was 75, yeah. The
Yeah,
question
so
is, do we
there's
want to
a
go
question
up?
whether we wanted to go to 60, but it's not actually 60, it's 75. And so I think that's a compromise between the 60 and the 100, so.
And the board, you know, this is something that we'll keep an eye on. It's, you know, how many variances we get for parking for restaurants. You know, if we find out that it's still not working, we can still increase it another 25 square feet up to 100 if the zoning commission feels that that's appropriate.
Actually, that was exactly going to be my question is, will this address the variances, or at least, you know, how many of them, the greater percentage of it, or where does this leave us?
We don't know. I mean, every lot is a different size.
So before we have discussion, I made a motion, we probably need a second.
Oh, yeah. A second by Mr. Solhavy. Okay, now under discussion, sorry. Go ahead, Jane.
I was just gonna say that, you know, we don't know with any certainty. You know, a lot of these regulation tweaks, we think that we're tweaking them in the right direction, and that it's gonna reduce the amount of burden on the zoning board of appeals and creating these non-conforming parcels with not enough, you know, parking that doesn't conform. So, you know, the goal is ultimately to get the calculation right and to have as many conforming lots as possible. I just can't tell you with any certainty that this is 100% gonna solve all the town's problems. I can almost guarantee you that it won't. But I think that it's heading in the right direction, and I would rather take a measured approach as opposed to taking the large bite approach and doubling it. So it's more of a conservative approach from my end.
I was just wondering if it really if it does help enough, but it is in the right direction, so we can see where it goes.
Okay, any further discussion on the text amendment? Seeing none, we have a motion by Mr. Hendrick, and the second was by Mr. Solhavy. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes 5-0.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Hendrick.
motion to take text amendment to allow for electronic message signs on town property off the table?
Motion by Mr. Hendrick, a second by Mr. Vacola. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Mr. Hendrick.
Mr. Chairman, I'd make a motion to approve the document in its entirety and send to the council, I don't know how, send to the council with favorable recommendation, is that what we're doing?
I would think so. We have a motion by Mr. Hendrick to send to the council. Do I have a second by Mr. Vacola? Any discussion on the matter?
I just have a question for clarity. So when you say that the entire document, we're talking about this 1, 2, 3-page document from October 15th.
What I have is well, I have the front and back page, so it would go from 16.2.9 down to, I guess, subsection 5, to the bottom of subsection 5.
And just as I draft this letter to the town council, they are only looking at the ordinance, or, because they wouldn't be adopting our zoning regulation, that would be something that we would ultimately do.
Yeah.
But you're waiting for the direction of them just as a whole. Is that?
I would like them to see the document in its entirety and know that our approval of it was based on the entire one-page front and back document.
Understood. Gotcha.
Okay. Mr. Solhavy?
So just a quick question here, just so I understand. So just procedurally, it was before us is adopting just 16.2.9 and then referring the rest of it to the council.
The entire document.
The entire document, okay.
The zoning commission is only adopting 16.2.9 to the zoning regulations.
Okay, so as it stands right now, and I don't know if this would be, technically, was this a spot zone? The way it's written in here, just 16.2.9, does that allow it anywhere in town until the town council limits it to Paradise Green and West Broad?
It's not allowed anywhere. It's not allowed anywhere until town council adopts the ordinance that says it's only allowed on town-owned property and actually only at West Broad Street Green and Paradise Green. Those are the only two places, if they approve the ordinance portion of it, where you could put it for now. I mean, they could hypothetically say town hall as well, or something else, I don't know, but that's the way we have it written.
But to enter, I think what Mr. Sahabi is going is, if we approve this, the next stop is town council for them to approve before anything happens.
Correct. Nothing can happen until the town council adopts the ordinance that says where it can go.
But
How is that spelled out?
Spelled out here in the ordinance, section 1. Any ground sign under section 16, which conforms to the terms of this ordinance, pertains to West Broad Street and Paradise Green, may include the variable electronic sign message, ...
But where I'm going with this, and I'm not trying to be difficult about it, is that 16.2.9 does not limit that at all. It just says that they are permitted. And if the town council fails to adopt the regulation, but it's still fails to adopt an ordinance, and it's still on the books of the zoning commission, is it still legal to do it in an unlimited fashion?
my approval was to include that in the language of our zone change as well.
He's including the whole thing, and the guidelines as part of the regulation.
For the text change. Our text change would include 16.2, and however they want to draft it out, but 16.2.9 all the way down to the end of number 5.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying.
So that's our zone change or our text amendment change, and that's what we're sending as well to the, town council.
That's what I understood Ms. Hendrick to say, that I agree with her as well, and I think that's what was recommended by planning.
And that's, I mean, typically you wouldn't do that in a written zoning regulation. We can, I mean, there's nothing that says we can't. I would make the recommendation that we can remove the sign, that we remove the word ordinance language on electronic message sign, so that it's just the definition, the locations, everything except for this title line. Essentially, this picture, this title line.
Yeah,
The rest of all the other language would all be included as part of
the text language, yes.
Yeah, we don't want them to have to buy that particular sign.
Yep. But unless we stipulate that, that's what goes in.
Yes, assuming that, unless the town attorneys have other thoughts.
Point, I mean, your point was that if you were just including that one sentence at 16.2.9, that you were sort of giving, it was freewheeling, carte blanche exactly to having it adopted as a zoning regulation. So you're basically saying that unless it gets lands somewhere by virtue of the ordinance, is that what you're?
That was my concern, is that, as I understand it, there's, the zoning regulation pretty much enables this to happen. The town council ordinance limits it. If the limiting part of this does not get passed, then only the enabling part is passed, and it would stand on its merits as it is if you read it. And it isn't limited to town properties, it isn't limited to anything. It just says, within the four corners of Stratford, this is legal. That's why I was asking the question.
I think it's a valid point. I'm sorry to be late to this game, but I almost think it should be the reverse. Until you hear from the town council, you don't adopt the regulation, but because.
As I understand it, they need to do an ordinance based upon what we send them. So we have to go first before them, is how I've always been told.
So is this a zoning regulation or not?
Half and half. Well, it was proposed as half and half. It's now a zoning regulation. And an ordinance.
It has,
Combined.
there has to be an ordinance that goes with it. And I did read, I'm trying to find it right now, that says that it is to be sent to the town council, and I can't find it where I read it.
We cannot enact on or impose an ordinance. That has to be the town council.
No, we can't act, but it is to go to the town council. But I can't find where are my ceilings of papers here. But I think the bigger issue is that as a zoning regulation, which is what Mr. Hendricks was saying as well, and I agree with, and the Planning Commission agrees with, is it to go complete without the picture in that one sentence, so that there isn't any misunderstanding about what the intent is.
Yeah, I mean, the way that this is written, I would say that it could go up anywhere on private property. I mean, if you just adopt it as a zoning regulation, because it's not.
That's not, you have to look at the back page.
My motion was to include sections 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5.
So,
I might be able to bring a little clarity to this. All this is a definition to provide an ordinance to be enacted. This does not say electronic message signs are allowed in LB R1 zone. And that's how our zoning regulations are set up. We define each sign, and then we go each zone, CA zone, a wall sign, a monument sign, a billboard is allowed in this zone. So all this is doing is creating the definition for the town council to establish an ordinance. So, I mean, I would defer to the town attorney's legal opinion. My interpretation when this was submitted was that just by adopting this definition, no one would be able to put up a sign anywhere. That's my interpretation of this regulation. Until the town council says, here's the ordinance, here are the lumens that are allowed, and these are the locations where you can do it.
But I think we took that one step further. I'm agreeing with you, but I think we took that one step further with including 1, 2, 3 through 5 that is more
Agreed.
specific, that if there was any reinterpretation that says this doesn't have to go to the council, which we know it should, they would still be limited by 1, 2, 3, and 5. In other words, to the council's point, number 1 specifically says exactly where it's going to go, exactly how many. It's spelled out, because the intent of this was to have an ordinance written around it and adopt it. So it doesn't give the latitude that you might interpret if the council didn't react on it. But, so,
So what you're saying is that you're solely adopting a definition for electronic message sign as 16.2.9, just to fit in with all your other definitions.
That was the intent, and then to send the second half of this to the second part to the town council, which would essentially allow a location for these to go. That's why it was broken up in two, and
that was,
the original intent wasn't to have it all as one.
that was the original intent. So, yeah, we changed it. So, Counselor, that's what's happened. The original intent has changed. So now it's not just 16.9, it's plus 5 points. So it's a longer document.
But you're not adopting the other 5 points as a zoning regulation.
Yes.
You're just adopting that 16.
No. No.
They want to adopt the entire thing as a zoning regulation now.
Correct.
Even where it's written ordinance language on electronic message signs? I mean, that's the next part.
No, and that's what Mr. Urbanski cleared up, that we were not going to include the picture or that word.
That word.
So it's going to be 16.2.9. It's going to be items 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5.
The picture and that sentence that says ordinance language on electronic sign message would not be included. Everything else would. Which is the intent, as we have just heard from the Planning Commission, that was their intent as well. So we're actually in agreement.
I guess a question that I've just come to mind, is, well, why would we send this to town council now? Since the locations, the everything is being determined by the zoning regulation, I'm not sure that it needs to go to town council.
Enforcement, ordinance.
I don't know that we need ordinance to allow it to happen. We were told it needed to go to council to be placed in the ordinance. That's why we're sending it to the council, but I don't know that we need to do that.
I don't think we need to if we're combining.
You may not, but I will defer to Attorney Kelly, because I, again, was always taught that you needed to have counsel on these public properties because you have to have an ordinance for enforcement.
It looks like they're both diligently working on it, so let's hear from them.
I'm fine with it either way.
As to
Okay.
the ordinance with use and ownership of public property, that is vested with the town council. So you'd want their approval to be able to do anything on town property. So it's rightful to go back to the council for that aspect of this, I'm going to say, zone regulation and ordinance. The answer,
We
the
heard
issue that I still see here is that the initial language on 6.2.9 is that it just talks about a ground-mounted sign only displaying a logo and/or alphanumeric characters against the solid color contrasting background, the characters of which can be electronically changed by remote or automatic means. I know there's other subparagraphs to that that talk about use on town property, but I'm not sure that limits the 6.2.9 to just town property.
With the subsections 1 through 5 too.
I mean, it looks like 16.2.9 is just a definition.
Correct.
So then you would have to figure out where those would go. So if it, let's say it goes over to town council and they say, yeah, we're on board for this, does it then come back to you to adopt a zoning regulation for where it's gonna go?
But that's one subsections 1 through 5 that define that. It pertains to Westport Green and Paradise Green locations. May include a variable electronic message sign that is mounted on the ground.
Basically, they get to accept it or not. When it goes to council, that's. From what I understand, it's gonna be a complete regulation that goes to council, and they get to accept it or not accept it.
It says any ground sign permitted under section 16. So does that mean 16.2.9, or is section 16 different?
16 is the signs, the entire sign regulation section.
So I would not see 16.2.9 as a section. I think section 16 would be a section, but we don't know if there's any ground sign permitted under section 16 because it's just a it's not a ground. The ground sign is just a definition. It's not a section. It's not saying where or when it's permitted. And then you're gonna go to council and ask them if they want to do it. Then is it gonna come back and there's gonna be a zoning regulation where it is permitted, whether it's.
So the question is, how do we think we're passing a regulation, and you're saying it's a definition, and you're saying that it can't be under 16 electronic sign, message signs, but 16.29?
I guess what I'm saying is that, and maybe I'm just confused, but it looks like 16.2.9 is just a definition of electronic message sign. It just tells you what that is, and it's just like saying what a setback is, whatever it is. It's just a definition. So it says, when we're talking about electronic message sign, this is what we're talking about. And that's just a definition. It doesn't say where it can be used, doesn't say anything like that, doesn't say how big it can be, doesn't say whether, anything about it. Then you've got these paragraphs that says any ground sign permitted under section 16. So I don't know if this is the only ground sign, or this is an electronic message sign, so I guess it says it's on the ground. It's a ground-mounted sign, so any ground sign permitted under section 16.
Maybe you should say 16.2.9, be more specific.
Well, but it's not, it's, so 16.2.9 doesn't permit anything. It's just a definition.
Mr. Chairman? I'd like to make a motion to table this and get some clarification. I think Mr. Hibansky knows and the attorneys know what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
And instead of trying
I
to...
would like to try to take a little closer look
Yeah,
at it.
so instead of trying to hash it out tonight, I'd like to have you guys review it, you know our intent, and then incorporate something that accomplishes what we're looking to do, and maybe provide us the process in which to do it.
Okay, we have a motion by Mr. Hendrick to table. Do I have a second by Mr. Solhavy? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
So moved. Thank you, Mr. Hendrick. Move things along. Mr. Hendrick. A motion by Mr. Hendrick to take 325 James Farm Road off the table. Do I have a second by Mr. Vacola? All those in favor say aye. Opposed? 5-0. Mr. Henrik, it's your pleasure.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Motion to approve by Mr. Henrik, second by Mr. Vacola. Now, under discussion, do we,
Why is everybody looking at me?
well, it's your district.
My district, I appreciate that.
So we refer to you.
No,
sir.
it's mine. It's 8. Yeah, or it's 4, more specifically. Yeah. Just as debate, boy, we didn't have any easy ones tonight, did we? You know?
I thought they were all.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Stephanie, drink the rest of the coffee.
As I mentioned during my remarks before, everything that goes on in that neighborhood is getting a healthy dose of skepticism, just because of what's been going on there for the last several years, if not longer. And after listening to the debate and the discussion, it made things a little bit more difficult to make a decision on. I think one thing that speaks volumes is this neighborhood is very much by definition very engaged, very informed, very active, and it does not appear that with the information that they've been provided that there was a major concern for this, especially by the fact I actually looked through all the certificates of mailing just to make sure they were complete. Not that I have any doubt, but they were, and somewhat of an absence here tonight. This may actually protect this parcel from the type of development that we've been seeing of late. I was a little curious about some of the discussions about the roads. It would be interesting to see what the final plot of the several subdivisions would actually end up looking like, because it's an awkwardly shaped area coming in right on the curve there, with a atypical intersection, and I think the land actually sort of slopes down a little bit to get to the Merritt Parkway, and abutting up against the bridge there. So it's kind of hard to envision how this is all going to work. However, like I said, I'm encouraged that this may actually be an opportunity for us to protect some of the land there. And I have not heard too many concerns aside about the development on there. So I'm interested to hear what other commissioners have to say, but this may actually be beneficial now that I look at this more clearly. So.
Okay, just to interject, the one thing that I heard, that the deed restriction on there, I think is going to help an awful lot, in keeping it into the character of what we would like to see in that neighborhood. Mr. Henrik, you had something you want to?
Yeah. So, based on Mr. Knott's comments, I mean, James Farm's always been a contentious subject. But I think the way this property lays out, I'm guessing maybe half the homes will be fronted on Harvest Ridge. Sight lines will be an issue coming around the corner once you come over the bridge, but I'm sure they'll address those issues, whether through planning or whatever it may be. But like as Mr. Salhavi said, I think by allowing this, it will protect that area. It'll keep the development. It's not an overdevelopment of the area, since Harvest Ridge and some of those other properties are similar in size to the lots. It is abutting the RS2 zone, so it's not a stretch. It's just a slight extension of that. So, and I think the deed restriction will help, although we can't mandate that. But and I do agree with Mr. Slavy that this will, I think, protect the neighborhood and keep it. I mean, I remember the Cut Spring Road, where they chased away some colonials once upon a time and ended up with 200 units and millions of dollars of legal fees because some folks didn't want, so some folks didn't want the colonials, and it was all hearsay. I wasn't a part of it, but I believe that to be true, and now we have Avalon Bay, which is, in the end, is fit in, but I think if we chase this away, we might end up with that there, and I hate to see that, so I think this is a good option and would fit nicely in the neighborhood.
Okay, and then I sidebar note that this property has been blighted for the last 2 years, and I've been dealing with the Fidelco family off and on to clean it up, and now this would resolve a lot of the problems up there with the constant vision of this house falling apart and many other things that they've had to do in the last year and a half. Any further discussion on this? We will act on the motion of Mr. Hendrick to approve, second by Mr. Vacola. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Passes 5-0.
Thank you very much, folks.
Good night. Okay, next on the worksheet, approval of the minutes from our September 25th, 2019 meeting. Anybody have a chance to go over the minutes and care to, this motion to approve by Mr. Salhavi? Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Second by Mr. Hendrick. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Pass 5-0. Campsite plan review, nothing on that. Zoning enforcement study. Accessory apartment apps, sediment erosion, planning projects, calendar of meeting. Has everybody had a chance to go over the meeting schedule for next year? Yes, they are.
They are. I know it's a little early, but you never know how many applications we're going to get, and I would feel terrible if we had to meet for just this.
You do have us in here on Veterans Day, just as a note, November 11th. I'm not sure if Town Hall is open that day.
The only question I have is I know you're gonna have a couple of new board members, and I don't know what their schedules are like. And I know when we change chairmans, we change the schedule. Does that mean that a new calendar, if they so choose, is gonna be a problem? Or can they change the calendar in January if they find that they can't accommodate this?
Yeah, they can amend it by January 30th.
The only problem with that is most of this room is booked up.
There are no
Every
nights
day of the
available.
week, there's no other nights available.
Not unless we want to do it somewhere else,
I think they have to be taped, right?
and they've got a date.
Not yet. Motion to approve by Mr. Hendrick, second by Mr. Vacola. All those in favor say aye. Opposed? So moved.
Sign that one, that nice one for me.
Okay, Alchemy Development and Stratford Zoning Commission, Mr. Kelly?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. There is no need to go into executive session this evening. I am pleased to report that we filed the proper dispositive motions, and the case was, I'm going to say, disposed of with a joint stipulation before trial. So the matter is now concluded.
Thank you very much. 96 Chapel Street, the Hindu Cultural Center, 18-month extension request.
Just the Hindu Cultural Center, I guess their project is based on their fundraising, and they weren't able to meet their goal over the past 18 months. They feel they can get it done in the next 18 months. Therefore, they're requesting their extension.
Motion to approve.
Motion by Mr.
Second.
Hendrick, second by Ms. Phillips. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, so moved. Army engine plant, nothing. Parking, I think do we have to strike that now, or is that still,
Well, I think we still have a couple little tweaks we want to make.
okay?
So unless you want me to take it off, I'll leave it on there until we address the school parking.
All right,
And
leave
maybe
it,
we take a look at the restaurant parking.
we'll leave it on there. Recommendations to town council, POCD, TOD, Mr. Hendrick.
As far as the antennas go, has there been any movement on the cell tower movement?
Well, I've been working with Attorney Bruce Jackson. I can't remember the name of it, but it's essentially the Middle Class Workers Relief Act that somehow has this antenna thing hidden in it somewhere. And it's, 300 pages that we're trying to make sure that our regulation and everything, we're gonna have to get rid of 3 pages of our zoning regulations and boil down what we're allowed to do by federal law and have that be consistent in the zoning regulations. So we're still working on that.
Would that include the movement of the existing towers to another location? Or?
Okay, I misunderstood what you were asking. I have been in conversation with the CAO about potentially relocating the antenna on the top of the cupola next door to on the rooftop of the high school. There seemed to be an appetite to do that. I think that right now they're working through the contracts to see how long they go for and to see if they're willing to void those and issue new contracts for the new location. I can check in on that. I haven't checked in a few weeks, so. Sure. Yeah, not much of it has to do with middle class tax relief, I'll tell you that.
Well, sounds like a good outcome could come from that. Okay. Anybody want to make a motion to adjourn? By Ms. Phillips, second by Mr. Vakola. All those in favor say aye. Opposed? Thank you very much, everyone.